The damages in a sex abuse case are what we call pain and suffering for psychological injury and emotional distress. Those are the typical types of damages. And what that means is there is suffering that occurs during the abuse and then following the abuse. Typically in a lawsuit, what's being presented is the past pain and suffering and emotional injury, and then the future. And so what we present to the court is evidence that shows the trauma that was suffered by the patient, how that's impacted your life. And we know that the types of damages that occur in these cases are what we call exponential, meaning that when a child is sexually abused 2 times, it's not 1 + 1 is 2. In fact, from the first time to the second time, there's a tremendous amount of distress and trauma that the child is suffering in between the abuse, with the expectation that there might be a 3rd time, or there could be a 4th time, and it builds up and it builds up. And then unfortunately, the types of damages that are incurred are typically the type of things we see in post-traumatic stress disorder, or the symptoms of that, which means that there's anxiety, the event itself is traumatic. When a person suffers a trauma, they typically have physiological changes that take place as a result of the trauma. People talk about the fight or flight or freeze response, and that's the human being dealing with the trauma. That results in people sweating, heartbeat racing, eyes and muscles constricting, a whole host of things that take place for the trauma that unfortunately for many victims of sexual abuse continue in the future, particularly when there's a trigger that reminds them of the abuse. And so these are all things that need to be explained to a jury, because these things are the core of the damages. That results in people self-medicating because they want to avoid the trauma. People may turn to drugs or alcohol to damp down the symptoms and the trauma that they're feeling. They don't want to feel those triggers. That impacts relationships, romantic, social, work. All these things may be implicated as a result of being victimized in a sexual abuse. In addition, when those things take place, it makes someone more depressed if they're suffering in their relationships at work or romantic relationships. And so again, they may be turning for substances to help them. And so these things are all tied together, and it's important to have a law firm that understands this web of damages so that can be presented on your behalf in your case so that you get a fair recovery.